7 days before the wedding. The Carter family home near Lake Mendota was filled with a quiet, efficient rhythm. Everything had a place. Every detail had been discussed, revised, and confirmed more than once. The final preparations were no longer about grand decisions, but about precision, timing, coordination, making sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Natalie Carter moved through the house with calm focus. She was not frantic, not overwhelmed, not swept up in nerves the way people expected brides to be. If anything, she appeared centered. Lists were neatly arranged on her phone. Appointments were confirmed. Vendors had been called. The schedule for the wedding day, both the civil registration in the morning and the church ceremony later that afternoon, was locked and down to the minute. It had been Natalie's idea to do everything on the same day. She did not like drawn-out processes or prolonged uncertainty. One day, one decision, one clear step forward. Benjamin Carter, everyone called him Ben, had agreed without hesitation. The family had gathered at the Carter country house to go over the final details together. The property sat a short drive from Madison, tucked behind tall trees with a wide yard, a detached garage, and long windows that looked out toward the lake. It was a place that reflected the Carters themselves, solid, well-maintained, quietly prosperous without excess. Helen Carter stood at the kitchen counter, arranging plates as she listened to the conversation around the dining table. She nodded at the right moments, asked practical questions, and made small notes on a legal pad. On the surface, she was composed, helpful, engaged, but beneath that calm exterior, something tugged at her. She studied Ben when she thought no one was watching. The way he spoke, measured, respectful. The way he listened more than he talked. The way he always seemed aware of where Natalie was in the room, as if tracking her without making it obvious. There was nothing wrong with him. No careless words. No arrogance. No visible flaws that a mother could point to and say, "There, that's the problem." And yet Helen's unease remained. It was not fear. It was not suspicion in the usual sense. It was closer to a quiet pressure in her chest, the kind that appeared when something important was being overlooked. She had learned over the years not to dismiss that feeling, even when she could not explain it. Richard Carter noticed his wife's silence. He sat at the head of the table, relaxed but attentive, listening as Natalie talked through the remaining logistics. Richard had built his life and his business by paying attention to details others missed. Decades in freight logistics had trained him to look for patterns, delays, and risks before they became problems. He saw no immediate danger in Ben. If anything, he found the young man dependable. Ben answered questions clearly. He did not exaggerate or try to impress. When asked about travel plans, paperwork, or timing, he responded with quiet certainty. Richard appreciated that. He also appreciated the way Ben never interrupted Natalie or corrected her, even when she misspoke about something small. To Richard, Ben looked like a man who knew his place and was comfortable in it. The mood in the house remained warm. There was laughter over lunch. Natalie teased her father about double-checking the guest list one last time. Helen reminded everyone about arrival times for the rehearsal. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows across the lawn. It was the kind of day people remembered fondly later, the kind they described as perfect. Natalie felt it too, standing by the window for a moment. She watched Ben talk with her father near the patio doors. She felt no doubt, no hesitation, no inner voice warning her to slow down or look closer. Everything inside her was steady. This was the man she had chosen. This was the life she was stepping into. Helen glanced at her daughter, then back at Ben. Nothing was wrong. Nothing was out of place. And yet, as the conversation continued and the sun began to sink lower over Lake Mendota, that quiet unease did not leave her. It waited. Helen and Richard Carter had never thought of themselves as exceptional people. They had simply lived long enough to understand how fragile stability could be. and how much effort it took to preserve it once it was built. They married young, at a time when neither of them had much beyond ambition and stubborn endurance. Their early years together were not marked by dramatic hardship, but by constant restraint. Every purchase was calculated. Every plan was measured against what they could realistically afford. They learned quickly that comfort did not arrive by accident, and that security was something earned inch by inch. Helen worked wherever she was needed in those years, adjusting her life around Richard's unpredictable schedule. Richard, in turn, accepted every opportunity that came his way, even when it meant long hours and little immediate reward. There were no shortcuts. There was only consistency, showing up, following through, trusting that steady effort would eventually compound into something solid. Their marriage endured because neither of them tried to carry it alone. When one faltered, the other compensated without complaint. Mutual loyalty was not something they spoke about often. It was simply practiced. Over time, that quiet partnership became the foundation on which everything else rested. Richard's logistics business grew gradually. What began as a small operation handling regional freight contracts expanded as his reputation for reliability spread. He did not gamble. He did not overextend. He reinvested carefully, chose partners cautiously, and avoided risks that promised quick gains at the expense of long-term stability. By the time Natalie was grown, the company provided a dependable income and a future that no longer felt uncertain. The Carter family did not live extravagantly, but they lived comfortably. Their home reflected years of intentional decisions rather than sudden wealth. The country house near Lake Mendota was not a showpiece, it was a retreat, a place where privacy, order, and routine mattered more than appearances. Those same principles shaped the way Helen and Richard raised their daughter. Protection came first, not in the sense of control, but in preparation. Natalie had been taught to think ahead, to consider consequences, to value self-respect over impulse. Foresight was not fear, it was responsibility. Helen believed deeply that love meant anticipating danger before it announced itself, not reacting after damage was done. Responsibility, to the Carters, extended beyond themselves. It included the people they brought into their family. When Natalie introduced Ben as the man she intended to marry, Helen and Richard did not assess him by charm or ambition. They watched how he behaved when he was not the center of attention, how he treated Natalie when he thought no one was watching, how he handled discomfort, silence, and uncertainty. Their concern was never about status or money. Ben's background did not trouble them. What mattered was whether he understood commitment the way they did, as something maintained daily, not promised once. That was why the wedding gifts they prepared were generous, but deliberate. Natalie would receive a modern studio apartment in a new development, fully paid for, located close enough to the city for convenience, but far enough to offer quiet. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to give her independence and security from the very beginning of her marriage. For Ben, Richard selected a new vehicle, reliable, practical, suited for all seasons. It was a gesture of trust, not charity. Richard did not want his future son-in-law to feel indebted, only supported. In addition, there was a carefully planned honeymoon along the Mediterranean coast, chosen not for luxury alone, but for the promise of uninterrupted time together, a chance to begin their life away from obligations and expectations. These gifts were not leverage, they were insurance. Helen believed that removing external pressure gave a marriage room to reveal its true character. If love was genuine, it would strengthen. If it was not, no amount of comfort could disguise the truth forever. From the outside, their caution could be mistaken for interference. Helen knew that. She had heard similar accusations before, from acquaintances who confused vigilance with distrust. But she also knew how often disaster arrived disguised as perfection. Her concern about Ben did not come from anything he had done wrong. That was what troubled her most. It came from the absence of explanation, the same way a sudden silence in a familiar room could feel unsettling. Richard understood this instinct, even if he did not fully share it. He did not dismiss Helen's feelings, nor did he allow them to dictate action prematurely. Observation, he believed, was still the most honest form of judgment. Together, they waited, not to interfere, not to accuse, only to make sure that the life their daughter was about to enter was as solid as the one they had spent decades building for her. Natalie Carter had never been a woman who moved loudly through the world. She did not demand attention, nor did she retreat from it. There was a measured quality to her presence, a calm that came from knowing who she was and what she would not compromise. Her style reflected that balance. She dressed with intention rather than trend, choosing clean lines and thoughtful details. At times she favored soft, romantic silhouettes. At others, structured pieces that reflected the professional role she stepped into each day. She was neither rigid nor whimsical. What she wore depended on her mood, her purpose, and the space she was entering. The same could be said of her demeanor. Emotionally, Natalie was reserved but not distant. She felt deeply, but she did not rush to expose those feelings. Vulnerability, to her, was something earned over time. She believed that restraint was not the absence of passion, but its discipline. That belief guided nearly every decision she made. At work, Natalie's reputation preceded her long before her last name did. She chose to build her career within the family company not out of convenience, but because she understood its operations and saw where her skills could be applied. Marketing, strategy, public-facing communication, these were areas where she excelled. She brought clarity where there had once been habit, and structure where there had been assumption. Employees respected her because she was competent, not because she was Richard Carter's daughter. She arrived prepared. She listened. She corrected without condescension. When mistakes happened, she addressed them directly and moved forward. Natalie did not hide behind her father's authority, nor did she reject it out of pride. She understood that trust, once earned, had to be maintained through consistency. Outside of work, her life was quieter than most people assumed. Invitations came easily. She was social when she chose to be, engaging and articulate in company. But she did not chase distraction. Natalie valued solitude, reading, long drives along familiar roads, time to think without interruption. She believed that a person needed space to hear their own thoughts clearly. Her romantic history reflected that same philosophy. There had been interest, flirtation, opportunities to pursue relationships that promised excitement without depth. Natalie declined most of them, not because she was fearful or inexperienced, but because she was selective. She did not believe intimacy should precede trust, nor did she see value in rushing toward something simply to avoid being alone. That restraint had sometimes been misinterpreted. Friends teased her. Acquaintances speculated. Even her mother occasionally worried that Natalie was waiting for a perfection that did not exist. Natalie dismissed those concerns quietly. She trusted her internal compass. It had guided her well so far. Patience, she believed, was not passive. It was active waiting, remaining open while refusing to settle. She had watched enough marriages unravel to know that compatibility revealed itself slowly, often after the initial excitement faded. Natalie did not want to be surprised by who someone became once the performance ended. When she met Ben, it was that intuition that responded first. Not excitement, not infatuation, recognition. There was something in his steadiness that aligned with her own. His silence did not unsettle her. His lack of self-promotion did not read as insecurity. Natalie sensed in him a person who acted deliberately, who weighed words before speaking, who did not waste energy trying to impress. Over time, trust replaced curiosity. Comfort replaced caution. She did not fall quickly, but when she did, it was with full awareness. Natalie believed that love, like character, revealed itself in patterns rather than moments. She trusted what she observed repeatedly, not what was declared once. That belief allowed her to commit without fear. It allowed her to plan a wedding without anxiety. It allowed her to stand in the present, confident that she was moving toward something solid. There was no doubt inside her, no voice urging hesitation, no sense that she was betraying herself by moving forward. What Natalie could not know, was how fragile certainty could be when the truth was incomplete, or how easily even the most carefully built inner world could fracture when a single assumption took root. For now, everything within her remained intact, steady, whole, unaware of how close it was to being shattered. Natalie remembered the day she met Ben with unusual clarity, not because it had been dramatic at first, but because it had been ordinary in the way moments of fate often were. She had been driving aimlessly that afternoon, enjoying the empty stretch of road outside Madison, letting speed and motion clear her thoughts. When the fuel warning light appeared, she pulled into a small gas station along the highway, more irritated by the interruption than concerned. She parked quickly, locked the car by habit, and walked inside to pay. Her purse left on the passenger seat where she could see it through the window. It was not until she stepped back outside that she noticed movement near her car. Two teenage boys stood close to the passenger door, their bodies angled in a way that felt wrong before her mind had time to label it. One of them had already opened the door. In his hand was her purse. Natalie froze. The distance between them felt suddenly too wide, her voice too small to matter. She did not have time to react. A man who had been sitting at a nearby outdoor table rose to his feet in one swift motion. He crossed the space between them with long, decisive strides. There was no shouting, no dramatic display of anger, just speed and certainty. Within seconds, both boys were on the ground, startled more than hurt, their bravado gone. The purse landed on the pavement beside them. They scrambled up and ran, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. The man remained where he was, breathing evenly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He picked up the purse, glanced toward the store entrance, and waited. Natalie approached cautiously, her pulse still racing. The man towered over her, broad-shouldered, solid, with a presence that felt immovable. He handed her the purse without ceremony. "You should check your locks," he said calmly. "They were quick." She stared at him, then at the car, disbelief creeping in where fear had been. "I locked it," she replied, uncertain. "I always do." He shrugged slightly. Maybe. Or maybe they didn't care. She took the purse, her fingers brushing his by accident. "Thank you," she said. Then, almost without thinking, added, "You didn't have to do that." He looked at her for a moment, studying her expression rather than her appearance. Someone should. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Natalie smiled. "I suppose," she said lightly, "that after everything we've just been through together, you're obligated to marry me now." The words surprised even her. They came out playful, exaggerated, a way to reclaim control of the moment. She laughed, expecting him to laugh too, or to look confused, or to walk away. Ben did none of those things. He stepped back, lowered himself to one knee with deliberate calm, and held out her purse as if it were something ceremonial. "My name is Ben," he said, "and you've already impressed me. I won't ask you to decide now. I'll give you 1 year. 1 year from today. We'll meet right here. If you agree to see me until then, every day if possible, I'll ask again." Natalie was speechless. It was absurd, bold, entirely unexpected, and somehow it did not feel like a performance. She studied his face, searching for irony or arrogance. She found neither. "My name is Natalie," she replied finally, "and if you're serious, you should probably ask for my number." Ben nodded once. That would help. From that day on, they met daily. sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks, sometimes for nothing more than conversation that stretched into silence without discomfort. Ben did not rush. He did not touch her without invitation. He did not demand explanations or make promises he could not keep. He spoke little about himself, offering facts rather than stories. School, military service, a degree that had not led where he expected, fitness training that suited him better. He listened far more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were measured. Natalie found herself lowering her guard gradually, without noticing the moment it happened. Trust formed not through intensity, but through repetition, through consistency, through the absence of pressure. By the time the year passed, her surrender was complete, not to passion but to certainty. The proposal that followed felt inevitable, and Natalie never once questioned whether saying yes was the right decision. For all her confidence and composure, Natalie approached intimacy with the same deliberation that guided the rest of her life. She did not mistake desire for readiness, nor did she believe that closeness had to be rushed in order to be real. With Ben, she felt no pressure to cross boundaries before she was prepared to do so. He never asked, never hinted, never tested her resolve. That restraint, more than any declaration, made her feel safe. Their closeness grew quietly. Touch arrived gradually, without urgency, woven into moments that felt natural rather than claimed. When Natalie finally chose to let the distance between them dissolve, it happened without ceremony, without fear. It was not an impulsive act. It was a decision. Their first night together was not dramatic. There were no rehearsed words, no exaggerated gestures. What remained with Natalie afterward was the gentleness of it, the careful way Ben moved, the patience in his touch, the unspoken understanding that this moment mattered. He did not rush her. He did not assume. He paid attention in a way that made her feel seen rather than possessed. In the morning, she woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. Ben had risen early, unsure of what else to do. When she joined him, she found breakfast waiting, simple, imperfect, clearly unfamiliar territory for him. The coffee cup looked small in his hands. The food was unevenly prepared, and yet the effort behind it struck her more deeply than any polished display ever could have. He did not ask if she regretted anything. He only said that he would show her how he felt in the way he lived beside her. Natalie believed him. Over the following weeks, her happiness began to show in ways even she did not notice at first. Her posture softened. Her laughter came more easily. The tension she had carried for years, an invisible vigilance, eased. When she visited her parents, Helen noticed it immediately. Natalie's eyes looked different, brighter, more settled. Helen said nothing at first. She watched, observed how Natalie spoke about Ben without embellishment, without defensiveness. There was no need to justify him, no effort to convince. That, more than anything, reassured her. The Christmas visit to the Carter home became the first true test. Ben arrived with Natalie, visibly reserved but composed. He greeted Helen and Richard with respect, answering questions carefully, offering help without being asked. He did not attempt to ingratiate himself, nor did he retreat into silence. He was present, attentive, and unassuming. The house filled with familiar sounds, the clink of dishes, muted conversation, the quiet hum of comfort that defined the Carter household during holidays. Natalie moved through the rooms easily, at home in a way that felt deeper now that she was no longer alone in it. At one point, while conversation flowed around the dining table, the family dog rose from his place near the fireplace. The large Saint Bernard, old and discerning, approached Ben without hesitation. He rested his massive head against Ben's knee and waited. Ben froze, uncertain how to respond. "Go ahead," Natalie said softly. "He doesn't do that with just anyone." Ben placed his hand on the dog's head, stroking it gently. The dog exhaled, content, and settled there as if he had always belonged. Helen watched the exchange closely. Animals, she believed, sense things people often missed. From that moment, the tension she had carried loosened slightly. Not entirely, but enough. The visit ended without incident. In the weeks that followed, Natalie and Ben traveled together, spent time away from the city, built routines that felt natural rather than forced. Helen noticed that Natalie no longer sought reassurance. She simply lived her life, confident in the direction she was heading. Richard, too, adjusted his perspective. He saw how Ben deferred to Natalie's judgment without resentment, how he accepted support without entitlement, how he spoke of the future with responsibility rather than fantasy. If there were doubts, they remained unspoken. To Natalie, everything aligned. Love felt steady. The approval of her family felt earned rather than granted. Even Helen's earlier unease seemed to fade beneath the consistency of Ben's actions. Looking back later, Natalie would remember this period as the calmest of her life. The moment when every choice she had made appeared validated, when the world seemed orderly and fair. It was the illusion of certainty, and it was complete. Helen's unease did not vanish. It receded for a time, softened by routine and the visible happiness of her daughter, but it never fully left. Instead, it returned in quieter moments, when the house was still, when conversations ended, when there was nothing to distract her from the sensation that something important was being overlooked. She could not name the cause. That was what troubled her most. Everything appeared settled. The wedding plans were complete. Natalie and Ben were living together without tension. There had been no arguments, no unexplained absences, no signs of duplicity. And yet, Helen felt the same pressure in her chest she had felt years earlier, when a shipment delay once threatened Richard's business and no one else had noticed the pattern forming. She said nothing at first. Richard noticed anyway. They were in the garage one afternoon, going over minor arrangements for the coming week, when Helen finally spoke. Not an accusation, not even uncertainty, just a quiet admission that her heart was restless. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. He did not dismiss her concern. He never had. That evening, while Natalie was away, Richard returned to the garage alone. Ben's car was parked in its usual place, clean, orderly, nothing about it suggesting secrecy. Richard worked methodically. The camera was small, discreet, the kind used in professional settings where documentation mattered. He installed it carefully, positioning it where it would capture movement without being immediately noticeable. He told himself it was precaution, not suspicion. Natalie discovered the camera 2 days later. She had gone into the garage looking for a box of documents when she noticed the unfamiliar device tucked beneath the dashboard. Recognition came instantly. She knew the model. She had seen similar equipment used in her own work. Her first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by anger. She confronted her father that evening. Richard did not deny it. He explained calmly, choosing his words with care. He spoke of Helen's unease of experience, of the responsibility he felt to protect his daughter from irreversible mistakes. He emphasized that this was not about mistrust, but verification. Natalie did not hear the distinction. Her protest was immediate and emotional. She accused him of crossing a line, of violating privacy, of undermining the trust she had built with Ben. She reminded him that this was her life, her choice, her future. She had not asked for surveillance. She had asked for faith. Richard listened. He did not argue. He did not justify himself further. When Natalie finished, her voice tight with frustration, he said only that if there was nothing to find, then nothing would be lost. That sometimes certainty required uncomfortable measures. They reached a compromise neither of them found satisfying. The camera would remain. Ben would not be told. Natalie agreed, reluctantly, setting a single condition, that if anything was discovered, she would be the first to know. She refused to let this become a secret shared behind her back. From that point on, something shifted. Natalie tried to behave as she always had, but awareness crept into her thoughts. She watched Ben more closely. Not suspiciously at first, just attentively. She noticed small changes she might otherwise have ignored. Moments when he seemed distracted. Pauses before answering simple questions. A distant look that vanished as quickly as it appeared. She told herself it was stress, wedding pressure, fatigue. Ben did not withdraw from her. He remained attentive, present, affectionate in his steady way. But there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when his mind seemed elsewhere. Once, when she asked whether he wanted coffee or tea in the morning, he hesitated longer than usual, as if the question had reached him from far away. Then he smiled and answered as he always did. Natalie pushed her discomfort aside. She did not want to become the person her father feared she already was. Blind, emotional, reactive. She trusted Ben. She believed in the life they were building. Still, the presence of the hidden camera lingered in her thoughts like a held breath. Unseen. Waiting. Natalie waited until the apartment was quiet. Ben had fallen asleep quickly that night, the steady rhythm of his breathing filling the bedroom with a sense of normalcy that felt almost cruel in its timing. She lay awake beside him for a long while, staring at the ceiling, listening. When she was certain he would not wake, she slipped out of bed and moved silently into the living room. The camera sat where she had hidden it earlier, wrapped in a cloth, heavier now than it had been when she first found it. Her hands felt unsteady as she connected it to her laptop. She told herself she was doing this to put an end to the tension, to confirm that her father's caution had been unnecessary. She expected reassurance. The screen flickered to life. At first, there was nothing remarkable. Ben's car pulled out of the driveway, the familiar street sliding past the windshield. Natalie watched the footage at double speed. Her posture relaxed, almost bored. She had seen these roads countless times. Madison at dusk, traffic lights, intersections, the mundane texture of daily life. Then the route changed. Ben turned off the main road and continued toward an area Natalie did not recognize. The surroundings grew quieter. Fewer buildings, more trees. The sky darkened as the car moved farther from the city center. Natalie slowed the playback, leaning closer to the screen. Her heart began to beat faster. The car stopped in front of a low, wide building set back from the road. A sign stood near the entrance. The footage was not clear enough to read it fully, but Natalie could make out enough to understand its purpose. An assisted living facility. Long-term care. Ben stepped out of the car. A few minutes later, he returned pushing a wheelchair. The woman seated in it was young. Younger than Natalie had expected. Her posture was fragile, her movements limited. She looked toward Ben with a familiarity that tightened something sharp in Natalie's chest. Ben leaned down, adjusting the blanket around the woman's legs with practiced ease, his hands gentle, precise. Natalie's breath caught. The footage jumped, skipping a few seconds at a time. The camera did not capture everything, only fragments. Ben, helping the woman into the passenger seat. The wheelchair folded and placed in the trunk, his hand steadying her shoulder as she settled in. The car pulling away. Natalie watched in silence, her mind struggling to assemble meaning from what she was seeing. The scenery changed again. Open fields, a narrow road. Ben stopped the car near a clearing filled with wildflowers, daisies, bright even in the fading light. He stepped out, walked a short distance, and returned with an armful of them. When he handed them to the woman, she laughed, a sound Natalie could not hear clearly, but could see in the movement of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. They spread a blanket on the ground. A picnic. Ben moved with an ease Natalie recognized. The same attentiveness he showed her. He helped the woman onto a fallen tree trunk, arranging the blanket beneath her carefully. He unpacked food, offered it to her first, watched to make sure she was comfortable. Natalie's hands went numb. The footage continued in uneven bursts. The woman eating, smiling, Ben speaking, his face animated in a way Natalie rarely saw when he talked about himself. At one point, he lifted the woman easily, carrying her a short distance across the clearing, pointing out something beyond the camera's view. She clung to him, laughing again. Natalie felt as though she were watching a version of Ben she had never known. The audio cut in and out. Wind distorted some of the sound. At times there was nothing but silence. The gaps made everything worse. They left room for imagination, for interpretation, for fear. She leaned closer, straining to catch any word that might explain what she was seeing. Near the end of the recording, the car interior filled the frame again. The woman's face was partially visible now, her expression serious. She was speaking. Ben responded quietly, his voice clearer than it had been before. The words came through without distortion. "I don't know how to live like this," the woman said. "I'm scared all the time." Ben did not hesitate. "I'm with you," he replied. "We'll raise the baby together. We'll manage. I promise." Natalie froze. The sentence echoed in her mind, detached from time, from context, from everything she thought she knew. She replayed it once, twice. Each time, the words landed with the same finality. "We'll raise the baby together." Her vision blurred, though she did not realize she was crying. Her body felt heavy, unresponsive, as if the weight of the truth she believed she had uncovered pressed her into the chair. There was no room for doubt now. No alternative explanation that made sense of what she had seen and heard. The pieces aligned with devastating clarity. A hidden life, a woman she did not know, a child she had never been told about, tenderness that had never belonged to her alone. Natalie closed the laptop slowly. The apartment around her felt unfamiliar, stripped of meaning. Every shared object, every quiet habit suddenly seemed like evidence of a lie she had willingly believed. She could not move. She could not think. Her mind hovered somewhere distant, watching her own collapse from afar. She had trusted him, not blindly, carefully, deliberately, and yet here she was, staring at proof that her certainty had been built on something incomplete. Natalie sat there for a long time, unable to stand, unable to breathe deeply, unable to reconcile the man sleeping in the next room with the one she had just seen on the screen. This was not suspicion anymore. This was betrayal, and it hollowed her out completely. Natalie did not sleep. Morning arrived without transition, the light creeping through the windows as if nothing had changed. Ben moved through the apartment with his usual quiet efficiency, unaware of the fracture that had already split the night in two. He poured coffee, asked if she wanted some, spoke about the errands he planned to run before work. Natalie watched him with a stillness that frightened her. The man in front of her was familiar in every detail, his voice, his posture, the way he waited for her answer without pressure. And yet, the words from the recording echoed over everything he said, flattening meaning into noise. When he finally noticed her silence, he stopped. "What's wrong?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. She stood, crossed the room, and set her laptop on the table between them. Her hands were steady now, too steady. "I need you to watch something," she said. Ben's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. He nodded once and took the seat across from her. Natalie pressed play. He watched without interruption. The footage unfolded again. Roads, the unfamiliar building, the wheelchair, the picnic. Ben did not look away. He did not flinch. When the audio reached the moment Natalie could not forget, the words filled the room once more. "We'll raise the baby together." Natalie closed the laptop. She met his gaze, waiting for him to speak. For denial, for explanation, for anything that might pull the ground back into place. Instead, Ben remained silent. Her voice broke the stillness sharply. "How long?" she demanded. "How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Ben said nothing. "Do you know what this looks like?" she continued, her restraint unraveling. "A woman I've never met. A child you never mentioned. Promises you made behind my back." Her chest tightened as the words came faster now. "Were you ever going to tell me? Or was I supposed to find out after the wedding?" Still nothing. Natalie stood abruptly, anger flooding in where shock had been. "I trusted you," she said. "I didn't rush into this. I didn't close my eyes and hope for the best. I chose you because I believed you were honest with me." Ben's jaw tightened, but he did not respond. "Say something," she said. "Defend yourself. Explain. Tell me I'm wrong." The silence stretched between them, unbearable in its restraint. Finally, Ben rose from the table. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden motion might shatter what remained. He gathered his jacket from the chair, his keys from the counter. He did not reach for Natalie. He did not try to stop the collapse unfolding in front of him. "I'm leaving," he said quietly. "That's it?" Natalie asked, disbelief sharpening her tone. "You don't even try?" Ben paused at the door. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for a moment she thought she saw something like regret pass across his face. But if there was anything else he wanted to say, he did not say it. "I won't argue with you," he replied, "and I won't explain something you're not ready to hear." The door closed behind him without force. Natalie stood alone in the apartment, the echo of his departure settling into the walls. The quiet felt heavier than any argument could have been. There was no catharsis, no release, only the certainty that something essential had ended. She moved through the rest of the day with mechanical precision. Calls were made, messages sent, appointments cancelled. The church ceremony was called off. The civil registration was voided. Each conversation was brief, factual, devoid of explanation. Natalie did not owe anyone justification. When she arrived at her parents' house that evening, Helen was waiting. Natalie did not need to speak. One look at her face was enough. They sat together at the kitchen table as Natalie told them what she had seen, what she had heard, what Ben had refused to explain. Richard listened without interruption, his expression darkening not with anger, but with recognition. Helen reached for Natalie's hand and held it firmly. Neither of them questioned her decision. They did not ask whether there was another explanation. They did not suggest patience or reconciliation. They did not urge her to reconsider. To them, the matter was already settled. A marriage built on deception, perceived or real, could not stand. "You did the right thing," Helen said quietly. "You protected yourself." Richard nodded. "If he chose silence, that's his responsibility, not yours." The support should have brought relief. Instead, it cemented the finality of what had happened. That night, Natalie lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at the familiar ceiling. The life she had planned so carefully was gone. Not gradually, not gently, completely. The engagement was over. The future she had trusted was closed to her, and no explanation, spoken or withheld, could change that. The rupture was irreversible. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the assisted living residence, settling over the quiet courtyard where Olivia Carter sat in her wheelchair. A thin blanket rested across her knees. Beside her, a small diaper bag leaned against a chair. Its presence, both ordinary and extraordinary, evidence of a life few believed she would ever have. Her son slept peacefully, unaware of the weight of the past that had shaped the world he had entered. Olivia's thoughts often drifted backward, not by choice but by gravity. Her life had been divided early, before and after abandonment. She and her twin brother, Benjamin, were born minutes apart. 2 children, 2 futures. Only one was chosen. The doctors had used careful language when they spoke to their parents. severe autoimmune disease, progressive joint damage, uncertain prognosis, years of treatment with no guarantees. The implication was unmistakable. Olivia would require constant care, endless expense, and emotional endurance. Her parents made their decision quickly, too quickly. They convinced themselves that surrender was mercy, that institutions existed for children like Olivia, that they were not cruel, only realistic. They signed the papers while she was still small enough not to understand what was happening. Benjamin was taken home. Olivia was not. She did not remember the moment they left. She remembered only the echo it created, an emptiness that never quite closed. Her childhood passed through medical corridors and sterile rooms, punctuated by brief kindnesses and long silences. She learned early not to ask why she was alone. Questions led nowhere. Survival meant acceptance. By the time she was moved to a long-term care facility as an adult, Olivia had grown into a woman with quiet strength and careful hope. Her illness limited her body, but not her mind. She read endlessly, observed people closely, learned to measure affection in gestures rather than promises. She never expected family to return. Benjamin found her by accident. It happened years later, long after he had left home and begun building his own life. A question from a neighbor, carelessly asked, a name spoken aloud, a truth his parents could no longer fully deny once alcohol loosened their restraint. The revelation struck him with a force he had no language for. A twin sister, alive, abandoned, hidden from him his entire life. He did not argue. He did not shout. He simply left the house that night and never fully returned. Finding Olivia was not easy. Records were buried. Institutions had changed names. Years had passed, but Benjamin persisted with a singular focus that surprised even himself. When he finally stood in front of her wheelchair for the first time, neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Recognition moved between them without explanation. The resemblance was unmistakable. Something fundamental settled into place. From that day forward, Benjamin reorganized his life around her existence. He visited regularly, learned the routines of her care, advocated for better treatment, covered costs when insurance failed. He never spoke of obligation. To him, Olivia was not a burden reclaimed. She was a debt repaid too late, but still owed. He never told Natalie about Olivia at first, not because he was ashamed, but because he was afraid that her parents, protective, strategic, accustomed to control, would see Olivia as a liability, afraid that Natalie's life, so carefully structured, would be pulled into a reality she had not chosen, afraid that honesty would cost him the one future he believed he was finally allowed to want. So he delayed. When Olivia became pregnant, the delay became impossible to ignore. The child was not Benjamin's. The father was a young medical resident who had once rotated through the facility. He had been kind, too kind, unprepared for the boundaries his profession demanded. What began as attention blurred into intimacy, then into something neither of them fully understood until it was too late. When the truth emerged, the resident disappeared from Olivia's life with clinical efficiency, career intact, conscience compartmentalized. Olivia never asked Benjamin to fix it. She told him simply, "I'll keep the baby. If you don't want to be involved, I understand." Benjamin had never been more certain of anything. He rearranged his schedule, increased his workload, began saving aggressively. He researched accessible housing, childcare support, and long-term medical planning. He became not just her brother, but her shield. The footage Natalie saw captured fragments of that life, out of context, stripped of meaning. The assisted living facility was not secrecy. It was home. The picnic was not romance. It was respite. The flowers were not seduction. They were an apology for everything Olivia had lost before she had words for it. And the words Natalie heard, "We'll raise the baby together," were not a lover's promise. They were a brother's vow. Benjamin had planned to tell Natalie. He had rehearsed the conversation countless times, but fear delayed him. Then suspicion found him first. When Natalie confronted him, the shock silenced him completely. Not because he had no explanation, but because he realized too late that the truth would sound like an excuse. He chose silence over persuasion, withdrawal over defense. Olivia understood when he told her. "He loves you," she said simply, "and that's why he left." She carried the weight of the misunderstanding quietly, knowing she was its unintended cause, knowing that her existence, unhidden at last, had shattered something fragile and precious. Now, as her son stirred in his sleep, Olivia looked toward the courtyard gate. She had come here for one reason, to tell the truth, not for herself, not even for Benjamin, but because some fractures once revealed deserved the chance to heal, if only the people involved were brave enough to look at them directly. And this time, Olivia would not disappear. Olivia did not come to the Carter house with a plan to persuade anyone. She came because silence had already taken enough. Helen Carter was the one who opened the door. She recognized Olivia immediately, not from memory, but from the image burned into her mind by the footage she had once feared. The woman in the wheelchair did not look like a threat. She looked tired, pale, real. "I'm Olivia," she said calmly. "Ben's sister." Helen stepped aside without hesitation. They sat at the same kitchen table where so many careful decisions had once been made. Olivia spoke without embellishment, without accusation. She told them everything. About the illness, the abandonment, the years lost to institutions and paperwork. About Ben discovering her existence and rebuilding a bond that should never have been broken. About the pregnancy. About the child who now slept beside her in a stroller by the door. When she finished, the room was quiet. Helen's hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. Richard leaned back in his chair, his face drained of certainty. They had believed they were protecting their daughter. They had believed foresight justified intrusion. Instead, they had become the architects of collapse. "We thought we were being careful," Helen said finally. "We thought silence meant safety." Olivia met her gaze gently. "Silence rarely protects anyone," she replied. Natalie arrived an hour later. She stopped just inside the doorway when she saw Olivia, the woman from the footage, the one she had built a story around. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, tightness in her chest, a rush of heat behind her eyes. Olivia spoke first. "I'm sorry," she said, "not for existing, but for the pain you were pulled into." Natalie did not answer immediately. She listened as Olivia repeated the truth, this time without gaps, without fragments. Every missing piece returned to its place with devastating clarity. The picnic, the laughter, the promise, none of it had belonged to the story Natalie had told herself. Shame arrived quietly, not as humiliation, but as recognition. "I never asked," Natalie said finally, her voice low. "I didn't ask because I was afraid of what the answer might cost me." Helen closed her eyes. Richard lowered his head. Natalie continued, not accusing, not absolving. "I thought silence meant guilt, but I never considered that it might be grief." She realized then that Ben's withdrawal had not been cruelty. It had been resignation. He had chosen to leave rather than fight a version of himself that had already been condemned. The room held the weight of collective failure. "We interfered," Richard said. "We watched when we should have trusted. We suspected when we should have waited." Helen reached for Natalie's hand. "We didn't protect you. We controlled the moment instead of understanding it." No one argued. That evening, Natalie sat alone in her childhood bedroom once more. But this time, the ceiling did not feel like an ending. It felt unfinished. She thought about Ben, not as the man from the footage, but as the one who had waited a year for her answer without pressure, who had loved her through restraint, who had left without defense when trust collapsed. The next morning, she asked her father for Ben's number. Richard hesitated only a second before handing her the phone. Ben did not answer on the first call, nor the second. On the third attempt, his voice came through, measured, cautious. "I don't expect anything from you," Natalie said before he could speak. I just need you to know the truth finally reached me." There was a long pause. "I didn't come to argue," she added, "or to ask you to justify yourself. I just wanted you to hear this. I was wrong to conclude without listening." Another pause, this one heavier. "I don't know what to do with that," Ben said quietly. "You don't have to do anything," Natalie replied. "Not today. But if you ever want to talk, without defenses, without cameras, without fear, I'm here." She ended the call before expectations could form. Olivia watched from the doorway as Natalie set the phone down. She did not smile. She did not cry. But something in her posture eased. That night, Olivia prepared to leave. As Richard wheeled her toward the door, she paused. "Love doesn't always return to where it was broken," she said softly. "But truth gives it a place to stand." Natalie nodded. As the house settled into quiet once more, nothing was resolved. The pain remained. The past could not be rewritten. But something fragile and essential had survived. The truth.